For 3 months, my husband Mark had treated me like a stranger in our own apartment. Then one morning, he delivered a life-altering verdict. "You're sterile, Clara," he stated, his voice so devoid of emotion he could have been informing me we were out of milk. "You can never be a mother." He said this over a plate of pancakes, while I was frozen, a forkful of syrup-drenched fluff suspended halfway to my mouth. All those months of him recoiling from my touch, of him sleeping in a separate layer of blankets, of early morning gym sessions that meant he showered elsewhere. This was the reason he offered. My body was the problem. It was flawed, incapable of producing the family he so desperately craved. The irony was, I had a crisp manila envelope tucked away in my handbag, filled with test results that told a completely different story. Before we get into what happened next, if you're a believer that the truth eventually comes to light and that deceit is a losing game, please take a moment to subscribe. It's a free way to support the sharing of stories like this one. My fork dropped, the clatter against the ceramic plate echoing in the silence. The pancakes fell onto the floral placemat I'd found at a small boutique in Beacon Hill. Mark had complained it was too pricey for something we'd just spill on. It's strange the details that surface when your world is imploding. While he calmly sipped his black coffee, he was systematically dismantling the life we had built. "What did you just say?" The words came out as a choked whisper, barely audible. He glanced at his phone, swiping to a screen he had clearly prepared in advance. "I ran some tests. My fertility is perfectly fine. We've been at this for 3 years, Clara." He angled the phone towards me, but it was too fast, just a smear of charts and medical jargon. "The issue is you. The issue is you." 4 words to explain why he'd been dressing for bed like he was preparing for a midnight marathon. For weeks, he'd worn gray joggers and a moisture-wicking shirt, which in hindsight was fitting, since he was sweating through his lies next to me each night. His alarm had changed from 7 a.m. to 5:45 a.m. a month ago. The routine never varied. Alarm, grab the gym bag he kept packed by the door, and vanish before I could even mumble. "Good morning. The water pressure is better at the gym," he'd claimed when I finally questioned why our renovated bathroom with its rainfall shower head was no longer good enough for him. I thought back on all the plans I'd made, the little gestures that had been met with sudden, immovable obstacles. I had tickets for the National at the Orpheum Theater in my drawer, prime seats that had set me back over $400. When I brought them up last week, a critical project deadline had mysteriously appeared. Before that, a reservation at a coveted new restaurant clashed with an impromptu client dinner. A planned weekend trip to visit my parents in Vermont was canceled because of quarterly reports that he absolutely had to finish. It was as if my very presence had become an inconvenience to be navigated, not a life to be shared. "I need a family, Clara. I need to leave a legacy," he said, framing it like a corporate strategy, not the shared dream we had once discussed for hours. "You can't give that to me." My sister Sarah's visit last month suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. She'd found his wedding ring in his car's cup holder a week later. It was in his gym bag, then on his desk. His excuses were a rotating cast of absurdities. His fingers were swollen from too much salt. He'd developed a sudden allergy to the metal. The soap was causing a rash, but only on that one finger Sarah had cornered me in the kitchen, her brow furrowed with concern. "He's only eating takeout salads, Clara," she'd observed. "The man who once begged you for your bolognese is now surviving on chopped greens. Something is very wrong." I'd brushed it off, blaming the stress of trying to conceive. But now it was all so clear. For 3 months, he had rejected every meal I cooked. The roast chicken he used to adore, the chocolate chip cookies he'd proudly take to the office, the chili recipe I'd perfected from his mother's notes, all of it met with a chorus of, "I ate at work," or "I'm not hungry, had a big lunch." He had been methodically starving our marriage, one excuse at a time. "How long have you known?" I asked, my hand drifting instinctively towards my bag on the nearby counter inside. Dr. Evelyn Reed's report sat waiting. "Perfect reproductive health," she'd told me. Hormone levels are optimal. Everything is functioning exactly as it should. Does it really matter? Mark got up, smoothing down the front of his shirt, a shirt I had ironed for him just yesterday, back when I still believed we were just a team going through a tough time. The point is, we know now. We can stop pretending this marriage is going to work. Stop pretending. As if the last 6 years, the 3 years of meticulously tracking cycles, taking temperatures, and scheduling intimacy had all been some grand stage play he was now bored of performing. I made an appointment with a specialist, I said, my eyes fixed on his face, searching for a reaction, to get my own tests. A flicker of something. Was it panic? Or just annoyance that I'd acted without his direction? That's not necessary anymore. We have our answer. You mean your answer, I corrected him, from your tests that you had done without me, without even suggesting we go together as a couple. He took his coffee mug, the one I'd given him on our anniversary that said, "World's Greatest Husband," and carried it to the sink. I was just trying to spare you the public humiliation of finding out in a doctor's office, he said, spare me. As if this kitchen table diagnosis on a Thursday morning was some act of kindness. His tone was as flat as if he were discussing taking out the recycling. How very thoughtful of you, I said, the sarcasm sharp in my voice despite my attempts to remain composed. Mark turned from the sink, his gaze finally landing on me, really seeing me for what felt like the first time in ages. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, Clara. We both knew things were falling apart. This just gives us the reason why. Our marriage was failing because he was systematically dismantling it piece by piece. But I didn't say that. I just thought about the envelope in my bag, the papers dated only 2 weeks prior, the doctor's notes detailing my excellent fertility. I thought about Mark's phantom tests, the results he'd flashed at me too quickly to be read. I should get going, he said, glancing at his watch. The Omega I'd saved for a year to buy him for our 5th anniversary. I have a meeting. Of course he did. He always had a meeting when real life demanded his presence. As he gathered his things, laptop case, keys, and that ever-present gym bag by the door, I remained at the table, staring at my now cold pancakes. I was replaying the last 3 months through this new, brutal lens. His withdrawal wasn't about stress or work. It was a calculated retreat. Every step back, every inch of distance he created, every lie and every evasion, it was all a prelude to this moment, this announcement, this fabricated diagnosis that painted me as the defective one and granted him his freedom. The front door clicked shut, a sound of finality that left the word sterile hanging in the air like a poisonous fog. I reached into my purse, pulled out the manila envelope, and spread Dr. Reed's report across the table where Mark's imaginary medical chart had been just moments before perfect reproductive health. No barriers to conception, hormone levels optimal. I wasn't the one who was barren, but our marriage certainly was. The following Monday, a new lock appeared on Mark's home office door. It wasn't a simple key lock, but a digital keypad that beeped with sterile precision each time he punched in his code, broadcasting his secrecy. I was standing in the hallway holding a laundry basket when I saw him test it. He entered the code 3 times, as if to ensure I couldn't accidentally witness whatever secrets he was now guarding. New corporate security policy, he said, without me even asking. His fingers were still tapping at the keypad. Client confidentiality, you get it. I got that Sterling Financial had never once mandated home security protocols in the 6 years he'd worked there. I got that his laptop was already password protected, but I just nodded, adjusting the laundry on my hip, pretending it was perfectly normal for a husband to lock his wife out of a room in their shared home. That night, a blizzard descended on Boston. The wind howled and snow piled up against our windows, but that didn't stop Mark from taking a phone call in his car. I watched from our 3rd-story window as he sat in the driver's seat with the engine running, a plume of white exhaust billowing into the frigid air. His breath fogged the glass as he spoke, his hand gesturing animatedly. 20 minutes passed, then 30. By the 40-minute mark, I was genuinely worried I grabbed his heavy winter coat and went down to the garage. But when I tapped on the window, he looked at me with pure irritation, as if I'd interrupted a sacred ritual. He held up a single finger, so wait, and turned away, resuming his conversation while I stood there in the cold, holding his coat like an absolute fool. When he finally came back inside, his ears were crimson from the cold. "Important call?" I asked. "You wouldn't get it," he replied. And that simple dismissal stung more than any elaborate lie could have. The physical rejection, once subtle, became a public spectacle. We attended the funeral of our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a sweet woman who brought us a homemade pie every Thanksgiving. During the eulogy, I instinctively reached for Mark's hand, a simple gesture of comfort we'd shared countless times. He flinched away as if I'd scorched him, grabbing his phone instead and scrolling through emails while the minister spoke of love and loss. "Thought you were going for my wallet," he muttered in the car on the way home. The excuse was so nonsensical, I didn't even know how to respond. Who on earth reaches for a wallet during a funeral prayer? The true masterclass in public humiliation, however, came at the company holiday party in December. He had a last-minute client emergency, so I arrived alone. I scanned the bustling room at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, searching for the man I'd been married to for 6 years. I found him at the bar, laughing with a group of colleagues, people who'd been to our home for dinner parties. When I walked up, he turned and said, "Oh, this is Clara." Just Clara. Not my wife, Clara. Not, you all remember Clara. It was the introduction you give a +1 you barely know. A woman in the group, Jennifer, shot him a confused look. "Your wife, Clara," she clarified for him. "Clara, yes," Mark said, already turning back to the bartender. Jennifer gave me a look of deep sympathy that felt more like pity. I saw the others exchange glances, the kind that promised a group text dissecting this moment later. I spent the rest of the evening by myself in a corner, sipping wine and watching my husband work the room as if he were single, never once looking my way. He was building his case against me, and it started to get insultingly obvious. In January, I came home from the grocery store to find our shared iPad left on the kitchen island. The browser was open to an article titled, "When She Can't Conceive, the Hidden Signs." The search history was a breadcrumb trail of his narrative. Symptoms of female infertility, barren wife coping mechanisms, infertility support groups, Boston. He wanted me to see it. The iPad, which normally lived in his locked office, had been placed there deliberately. A week later, I was at a bookstore when I saw him in the health section. He wasn't buying books. He was taking pictures of pages from a medical text on infertility, his phone angled just so. When he noticed me, he shoved the phone in his pocket. "Research," he mumbled, his face flushed, "for a new client portfolio." "Since when did financial portfolios require information on reproductive health?" "It's complicated," he said, already walking away, leaving me standing there, feeling lost in my own life. The cruelest part was the cold calculation behind it all. Each planted article, each photographed page was a piece of manufactured evidence. He was constructing a narrative of my failure, so that when he finally delivered the verdict, he would seem like a concerned, heartbroken husband. My mother drove down from Vermont for my birthday in early February. She took one look around our apartment and I saw her face fall. It was like she could feel the emotional frost in the air. "It's cold in here," she said, pulling her sweater tighter, even though the thermostat was set to 72. At dinner, Mark handed me a generic birthday card he'd clearly grabbed from a drugstore rack. "Happy birthday," it said in glitter. He'd signed his name, "No Love," no personal note. Later, while Mark was on another one of his mysterious phone calls, my mother cornered me. "Clara, honey, what's going on?" she whispered. "We're trying for a baby," I recited, my now standard excuse. "It's just a stressful time." She gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it, This isn't stress. He didn't even write love on your birthday card. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I put on the broken smile I had been perfecting for months. We're just working through some things. When she left the next morning, she hugged me tightly. "You can always come home, you know," she whispered, no questions asked. But I wasn't ready. I was still clinging to the hope that the man I married was still in there somewhere, buried beneath this cold, calculating stranger. 2 weeks after my mother's visit, Mark called in sick to work. The conversation was short and convincing. He hung up, looked at me across the bedroom, and I knew whatever was coming next had been meticulously planned. He moved through the apartment with a strange, deliberate purpose. He made 2 cups of coffee, adding cream and sugar to mine without asking. He adjusted the blinds, letting the morning light hit our kitchen table like a stage spotlight. "Sit down," he said, pulling out my chair for me, a gesture he hadn't made in years. It felt chillingly rehearsed. I sat, watching him place the mugs just so. He set a thick, unmarked folder on the table beside his cup. "We need to have an honest conversation," he started, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. He slid the folder across the table. It stopped perfectly in the middle, a physical boundary between us. "I've been doing some research," he said, his voice clinical, detached, "about our situation, about why we haven't been able to conceive." My hands clutched my warm mug, a futile defense against the cold dread creeping over me. He began his practiced monologue. "Some women, Clara, some women just can't have children. It's nobody's fault, it's just biology." He opened the folder, revealing pages of what looked like medical charts. His finger traced a line pointing to highlighted sections, but he kept it just out of my reach. "The tests are conclusive," he stated, his voice flat. "Your reproductive system. It's just not capable. They call it primary infertility, irreversible. The doctors." Which doctors? When had I seen any doctors with him? A wave of relief washed over his face. His shoulders, which had been tense for months, finally relaxed. He hadn't been dreading this moment. He'd been anticipating it. "We need to explore other options," he said, his words gaining speed and confidence. "For a family, I need children, a legacy. You understand? A legacy." As if he were some monarch, not a financial analyst. I remained silent, and that's when my grandmother's teacup, the delicate porcelain one she'd given me at our wedding, slipped from my numb fingers. It seemed to fall in slow motion, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound was both sharp and final. Coffee bloomed across the wood in a dark stain, spreading towards Mark's expensive shoes. The cup had broken into a dozen tiny pieces. I knelt, my hands shaking not with grief, but with a cold, rising rage. That cup had survived my grandmother's 60-year marriage. It had traveled from her home to mine, a fragile piece of our family history. "Leave it," Mark said, stepping back from the spreading puddle. "I'll get paper towels." But I didn't leave it. I gathered each shard, cradling them in my palm. As my fingers closed around the broken pieces, I realized it wasn't just a teacup I was trying to hold together. It was something much bigger, something that could never be glued back. Mark returned with a roll of paper towels and tossed it onto the spill from a safe distance. He watched me on the floor with an impatient look. "It's just a cup, Clara." "It was my grandmother's." "We'll buy you another one." And that was it. The casual dismissal of something irreplaceable told me everything I needed to know. He could fake medical reports and rehearse speeches, but he couldn't grasp that some things, once broken, were gone forever. I stood up, the sharp edges of the porcelain digging into my palm. "I need some air," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "We're not finished talking about this." "Oh, yes we are," I said. Looking him dead in the eye for the first time that morning, I walked to the bedroom and placed the broken pieces in a small box. In the filing cabinet behind me, my real medical records were waiting, but I didn't reach for them. Not yet. Something about Mark's practiced relief told me this wasn't just about him wanting to leave me. He was hiding something else. I waited in our bedroom until I heard his car start and pull out of the garage. He was off to another one of his emergency meetings. Through the window, I watched his Audi disappear. Then I waited another 5 minutes just to be sure. His office door was ajar. In his haste to flee the scene of his own cruelty, he'd forgotten all about his precious security. The keypad blinked a soft green, the lock disengaged. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled of his cologne, the one I'd bought him for Christmas, but it was mixed with something else. The faint, sweet scent of a perfume that was not mine. His desk was a mess. Papers were scattered. Files were stacked precariously. I went straight for the filing cabinet, under a tab labeled Taxes 2024. I found what he was really hiding: statements for a credit card I never knew existed. The charges painted a vivid picture of Victoria's Secret, $142.50 on February 5th. Another charge for $98 2 weeks later. The receipt details listed the sizes: 34. Small. I was a 38C, medium. There were dinners at Giovanni's, the very restaurant he'd claimed gave him food poisoning, and multiple charges at L'Etoile, the place he'd called pretentious when I suggested it for our anniversary. I took out my phone and photographed every single statement, the click of the camera shutter sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. A receipt from a jewelry store in January made my breath catch a pair of diamond stud earrings for $2,500. I had never owned diamond studs. His laptop was open on the desk, asleep but not locked. One touch and the screen lit up, his personal email account already open. A bright pink flag caught my eye, his system for marking important messages. The flagged emails were all from a Chloe Evans. I knew Chloe. She was a recent hire in the marketing department at Sterling Financial. Young, blonde, maybe 28. She was at the holiday party, the one where he'd introduced me as just Clara. Now, the pity in her eyes that night made a sickening kind of sense. The emails began professionally in November, but quickly descended into something else. Can't stop thinking about last night. Your cologne is still on my pillow. I've never felt this way about anyone, but it was the email from February that made the air leave my lungs. The attachment loaded slowly, revealing a grainy black and white ultrasound photo, a tiny shape circled in red. The subject line read, "Our little secret." Chloe's message below was a dagger. I know the timing is bad, but this baby is proof that we're meant to be. As soon as you leave Clara, we can finally be the family we're supposed to be. I love you both so much. 12 weeks. A quick calculation told me she'd conceived in November, right when Mark had started sleeping in his gym clothes and recoiling from my touch. While he was calling me sterile and broken, he was creating a new life with someone else. I photographed it all. Every email, every declaration, every plan for their future. My phone filled with a digital dossier of his betrayal, but I needed hard copies. I went to the local library telling the librarian I was compiling documents for a legal case, which felt close enough to the truth. The printer hummed, spitting out page after page of his deceit. I bought a black, professional-looking binder and a set of dividers. Back at the library, I organized everything chronologically. November, December, January, February. Each lie, each secret meeting, each stolen moment now cataloged and preserved. My hands were steady now. I was building a weapon out of paper and ink. I couldn't take the binder home, so I drove to my sister Sarah's apartment, let myself in with the spare key, and hid it deep in her hall closet behind a wall of winter coats. It was my insurance policy. It was my power. The next morning, I called Dr. Reed's office. I need official copies of my test results, I told the receptionist, for my insurance company. Dr. Reed saw me that afternoon and ran the tests again, just to be thorough. "These numbers are phenomenal, Clara," she said, looking at the screen. "You're in the 98th percentile for fertility in your age group. I almost never see results this good." "Could you put that in writing for me?" I asked. The insurance company is being a stickler for details. She printed out multiple official stamped and signed copies. Medical proof that I was not broken. "Is everything all right?" Dr. Reed asked, handing me the folder. "You seem calmer than your last visit." "Everything," I told her, "is becoming crystal clear." I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat, my mind already building the set for my next performance. If Mark wanted a broken wife, I would give him the performance of a lifetime. I started at the bookstore, gathering a stack of adoption brochures. I left one on the coffee table, another as a bookmark in the novel on my nightstand, and tucked a third into my purse where it would be easily spotted. I spent an afternoon on our computer filling the browser history with searches for IVF clinics, donor egg programs, and online forums with titles like "Coping with a Barren Diagnosis." I even created a detailed spreadsheet comparing clinic success rates and costs, a touch I knew Mark's analytical mind would appreciate. My masterpiece was the support group Boston Fertility Fighters met on Wednesday nights. I showed up looking small and lost, wearing an old, oversized sweater. "I just found out," I whispered to the group, my voice cracking on cue. "My husband, he's trying to be supportive, but I can see the disappointment. He wanted kids so badly. The women were wonderful, their compassion genuine. I felt a pang of guilt using their real pain for my stagecraft. But I needed the stamped attendance card and the receipt from the donation box. I needed the breadcrumbs for Mark to follow." When I got home that night, Mark was there, holding one of the adoption brochures. "You're looking into adoption?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I thought, "Maybe," I said, letting my voice trail off with a sniffle. "If we can't have our own." A look of satisfaction crossed his face. He was relieved that I was accepting his version of reality. "That's very mature of you, Clara. Very practical." Practical. Over the next week, his behavior shifted. He came home later and later, no longer bothering with excuses. The smell of Chloe's perfume was a constant presence on his clothes. He was slowly moving out, piece by piece. His grandfather's watch disappeared from his dresser, off for a professional cleaning. His favorite books vanished from the shelves. He was dismantling our life, thinking I was too deep in my grief to notice. But I noticed everything. My sister Sarah became my co-conspirator. She'd call when Mark was home, her voice loud and theatrical. "Clara, honey, you have to find a new purpose. Women who can't have children often dedicate their lives to charity." "I know," I'd sob into the phone, while simultaneously taking notes on Chloe's pregnancy timeline. Maybe I just need to accept what's happened. Mark actually came out of his office and patted my shoulder, the first voluntary touch in months. It was so patronizing, so false. I had to bite my cheek to keep from laughing. "Your sister's right," he said, already backing away. Thursday afternoon, I got the text, "Dinner tomorrow, L'Etoile, 7 p.m., important news." L'Etoile, the restaurant where he'd proposed, the place we'd celebrated our first anniversary. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away, but this time it was with anticipation, not sadness. Friday afternoon was for preparation. I retrieved the binder from Sarah's and transferred its contents to a thick manila envelope. I arranged the pages for maximum impact. My pristine fertility results first, followed by the credit card statements, the restaurant receipts, the lingerie charges, the diamond earrings, and finally, the emails with Chloe. Ending with the ultrasound picture, I chose my dress with care. A simple black dress he'd once said made me look beautiful. The manila envelope felt heavy in my purse, a reassuring weight against my hip. I looked in the mirror and saw not a victim, but a woman about to rewrite the entire story. Then, another text from Mark. "Bringing someone, I think you should meet Hope, that's okay. Chloe." He was bringing his pregnant mistress to our restaurant to meet his barren wife. The audacity was stunning. It was perfect. I arrived at L'Etoile at 6:45. The maitre d' recognized me. "Mrs. Allen, wonderful to see you. Your husband requested a table for 3. 3. He was really doing this. "I'd like that table, please," I said, pointing to a prominent one in the center of the dining room. Mr. Allen requested a quiet booth in the corner. "I'm sure he did," I said, pressing a $50 bill into his hand. "But I have a touch of claustrophobia tonight. That one would be much better." The maitre d' glanced from the money to my face, and something in my expression must have told him this was about more than seating. "Of course, Mrs. Allen, right this way." The table was a stage. I sat facing the entrance, ordered a glass of water, and placed my purse on the empty chair beside me. The manila envelope was a loaded gun. At 7 p.m. on the dot, they walked in. Mark in his best suit, and behind him, Chloe, her hand on his arm. She wore a flowing dress that didn't hide her obvious pregnancy. The dining room hushed. I saw faces I recognized, colleagues of Mark's, people from our building. Their collective gasp was almost audible as they processed the scene. Mark Allen escorting his visibly pregnant mistress to have dinner with his wife. Mark's confident stride faltered when he saw me, not tucked away in a corner, but displayed for all to see. He recovered, guiding Chloe forward, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. "Clara," he said, his eyes avoiding mine. "This is Chloe. I thought it was time you two met." Chloe looked genuinely uncomfortable. "How lovely," I said, standing to pull out her chair before Mark could. "Please sit. You must be exhausted." She mumbled a thank you and sat. Mark took his seat, a referee between us. The waiter appeared. Mark ordered wine. "Actually, just 2 glasses," he corrected himself. "Chloe can't drink," I finished for him. "Of course not. Congratulations, by the way." The word hung in the air. Chloe's hand flew to her belly. "Clara," Mark began, launching into his script, "I know this is difficult, but given your situation, I think it's best we're all honest about the future." "My situation." "Angela and I," he continued, placing his hand over hers on the table, "have grown very close." "It must be so hard," Chloe chimed in, her voice soft with practiced pity. "Finding out you can't have children, Mark told me all about your diagnosis. Her performance was good, but I could hear the note of triumph beneath it. She was the fertile one, the winner." "Yes, the diagnosis was a shock," I said, taking a sip of water. "But there have been a lot of shocking discoveries lately." Mark's hand tensed on his wine glass. "We didn't plan this," Mark said, "but sometimes life takes unexpected turns. We have to move forward." "To new beginnings," I said, raising my water glass, "to the truth and to unexpected revelations." We clinked glasses. "Speaking of truth," Mark said, "Chloe and I want to be honest with you. We're going to be a family." "A real family," Chloe added, her hand caressing her stomach. "A real family, as opposed to what we were." "You know, you're absolutely right," I said, reaching calmly for my purse. "This is the perfect time for honesty." I pulled out the manila envelope. It landed on the white tablecloth with a soft thud. It was heavy with truth, impossible to ignore. "What's this?" Mark's voice was strained. "Open it," I said. His fingers fumbled with the clasp. He was trying to calculate, to guess what I knew. The seal tore with a sound that ripped through the quiet restaurant. He pulled out the papers, and I watched his face drain of all color as he saw the letterhead. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Reproductive Endocrinology, Infertility. His hands started to shake as he read the highlighted sections. Exceptional reproductive health. 98th percentile for fertility indicators. No barriers to conception identified. "This is impossible," he whispered. Chloe leaned over. "What is it, Mark? What's wrong?" "Those are my fertility test results," I announced, my voice clear and loud enough for the neighboring tables. "From 2 weeks ago and 6 months ago, all showing perfect health." He frantically flipped through the pages, but Dr. Reed's signature was on every one. But you said, Chloe began, turning to Mark, her face a mask of confusion. You told me she was barren. You showed me the reports. The reports he showed you were fake, I said coolly. Or perhaps we should talk about your actual medical history, Mark. His head snapped up, pure terror in his eyes. I pulled another document from the stack, your varicocele surgery, 2 years ago. The urologist said it might impact your fertility. You were supposed to go for follow-up testing. You never went. Chloe's hand was frozen on her belly. The doctor's notes said your sperm motility was severely impaired, I continued, watching his world crumble. Less than 15% normal. The chances of you fathering a child naturally are not good. That was before the surgery, he stammered. It fixed it. You never got retested, I pointed out. I checked. You just assumed. Chloe was looking between us, her mouth hanging open. But if Mark has fertility problems... The math was simple and brutal. She was 4 months pregnant. Mark had documented fertility issues. The baby she was carrying could not be his. No, Mark said, turning to her, his voice cracking. The surgery worked. That baby is mine. Of course it's yours, she said, but her eyes were wide with panic. Were you with anyone else? Mark's voice rose, drawing stares. Chloe, were you with anyone else? No. The word was too fast, too high-pitched, a lie. Chloe, he grabbed her wrist. Whose baby is it? It's yours, she insisted, but tears were already welling. The timeline doesn't work if I'm sterile, he practically shouted. Whose baby is it? The restaurant was dead silent. Every eye was on our table. Chloe broke. David, she whispered, the name a ghost in the silent room. David from marketing. There was some overlap. I wanted it to be yours, I swear. I watched Mark's face go from red to white to a sickly gray. The hand on Chloe's wrist went limp. You knew, he turned to me, his voice a hollow shell. I knew she was pregnant, I corrected him. The rest was just arithmetic. Your fertility problems plus her pregnancy timeline equals someone else's child. Chloe was openly sobbing now, her mascara creating black rivers down her cheeks. I loved you, she cried at Mark. I thought we could be a family. With another man's child? Mark's laugh was a bitter, broken sound. You were going to let me raise another man's son? Like you were going to let me believe I was broken, I interjected smoothly. We all make our choices, Mark. A waiter appeared. Is everything all right here? We'll be needing separate checks, I said brightly. I'm leaving now. I stood, leaving the entire contents of the envelope spread across the table like the wreckage of a crime scene. The divorce papers are at the bottom of that stack, I told Mark, who was now just staring at Chloe in horror. My lawyer will be in touch. I turned to the weeping woman. And Chloe, congratulations on the baby. I'm sure David will be thrilled to hear the news. The last thing I heard as I walked away was Mark, his voice broken, asking her over and over, how could you lie to me? The same question I had asked myself for months finally turned back on its creator. The maitre d' held the door open for me. As I passed, he murmured, "Well played, madam." Outside, the Boston night air felt crisp and clean. I pulled out my phone and called my sister. How'd it go? She asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Better than I could have ever planned, I said, walking towards the harbor. Turns out Chloe's baby belongs to some guy named David from marketing. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a sharp, glorious peal of laughter. So he called you Barren while being sterile himself, and his mistress was cheating on him with another man. Karma, I said, apparently keeps receipts. I kept walking, the click of my heels on the pavement, a rhythm of liberation. In the restaurant window, I could see the tableau of destruction I'd left behind. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. This isn't over. I deleted it without a second thought and blocked his number. He just didn't realize it yet, but it was already done. The divorce was swift. Humiliated and desperate to flee Boston, Mark agreed to all of my terms. I heard through the grapevine that Chloe had moved back home with her parents. David, it turned out, wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. 3 months later, I was on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the water when I got a call from an unknown number. It was Mark. I wanted to apologize, he said, his voice hollow. For which part? I asked calmly. For calling me Barren or for the affair? There was a long pause. Angela had the baby, he finally said. David is fighting for custody. She tried to trap me, Clara, with another man's child. Like you tried to trap me with a fake medical diagnosis, I replied. It's not irony, Mark. It's justice. I hung up. 2 weeks after that, I met Leo at a friend's party. He was a pediatrician with a kind laugh and eyes that held no secrets. When I told him my story over coffee, he just shook his head in disbelief. Your ex-husband called you Barren? I've seen your medical file. You're in the 98th percentile. You could probably get pregnant from a stiff breeze. It wasn't the most romantic first date conversation, but it was honest. 6 months after the divorce, I was planting a small garden on my balcony. As I pushed seeds into the rich, dark soil, I thought about things that flourish when they're planted in truth. The tomato plants grew strong and tall all summer, their vines reaching for the sun. I gave them away to my neighbors, to Sarah, even to the maitre d' from L'Etoile. These are incredible, he said, biting into a sun-ripened cherry tomato. What's your secret? Good soil, I told him. No lies mixed in. I received one last email from Mark. He was at a smaller firm now, living in a studio apartment. I destroyed everything, he wrote, for a baby that wasn't even mine. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Standing on my balcony now, the August sun on my face, I hold a perfect ripe tomato in my hand. Leo's arms wrap around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. What are you thinking about? He asks. I'm thinking, I say, turning the warm tomato in the light, that revenge isn't about destruction, it's about rebuilding yourself with better materials. I take a bite. It tastes like summer, like new beginnings, and like the particular sweetness of a life grown from honest ground. If this story of poetic justice had you on the edge of your seat, go ahead and hit that like button. My favorite part was when Mark's face collapsed as he realized Chloe's baby couldn't be his. What was your favorite moment of karma? Let me know in the comments below. And to make sure you don't miss out on more stories like this, subscribe and ring that notification bell. End of story.